Okay, chapter 25, the endocrine system. The endocrine system is a system made up of all of the hormone-producing organs in your body. Some of these organs are in other systems, like, for instance, some of the genitalia. Okay, organs that produce testosterone, estrogen, and progesterone are also in the reproductive system, but they are included here because they produce hormones. Hormones are just biochemicals for communication. Okay? The nervous system and the endocrine system are your two communication networks. The hormones are secreted by glands, and they travel through the bloodstream and alter metabolism of one or more cells. Each hormone only travels and binds to target cells. In order to bind to that cell, it has to have the correct receptor protein. Hormones interact with these target cells just like a radio. There's an example. A radio is only heard by people tuned into that radio station, whereas cells that have the correct receptor protein can be affected as a target cell to a specific hormone. This keeps hormones from randomly affecting cells in odd ways. Some of the things hormones can do, it's a slow lasting communication, whereas the nervous system is quick responses. They affect mood, emotions, sexual attraction, developmental patterns, among other processes. They do all sorts of things, and we'll cover a couple of those. Like, for instance, hormones regulate the changing of this caterpillar into this butterfly, or this tadpole into a frog. It's all done hormonally. There are two types, water-soluble and lipid-soluble. Now, since a cell's plasma membrane is made up of phospholipids, in order to get into a water-soluble cell, the hormone will bind to the outside. The lipid-solubles just move directly through, and we'll talk about both ways in which they affect their cells. Now, water-soluble cells can't just move in. So we have what is called a second messenger system. So here's a hormone. It's in the bloodstream. It comes out and binds to a receptor protein. Okay? Now let's go back. This receptor protein changes shape. Now this guy was originally attached to the receptor protein, and unfortunately it doesn't show that in this picture. But when the hormone binds to this protein, it changes shape, and this protein is unable to stay bound to the receptor. But it can go over here and bind to this second receptor protein. And this is called the second messenger molecule, because when this combines with this, it produces a molecule. Now the molecule will then kick off a reaction in the cell. It'll be sometime, and remember, arrows like this represent chemical reactions, and it will cause the cell to respond. And there's so many different possible responses and so many different hormones that we just are going to generally look at this as a cell response. Okay, so let's go over it one more time. This receptor protein is attached to this little messenger protein here. And so when a hormone comes out, it binds to the receptor, changes its shape. This pops off of this and attaches to this. When this attaches to this, it provides a substrate, or rather an enzyme, to produce this molecule. This molecule then will kick off a chemical reaction in a cell called the cell response. Okay? Water-soluble proteins work a little differently. Fat-soluble, lipid-soluble works a little differently. Lipid-soluble hormones can just dissolve right through a cell's plasma membrane. Doesn't really have any trouble. The hormone enters the cell, and it binds with a receptor protein in the cell instead of outside the cell. The receptor protein activates transcription of a gene, so it basically starts making a new protein. Okay, transcription is making a copy of the gene to make transfer RNA. Messenger RNA, so it can start producing this new protein. And then the proteins have an effect in the target cell. Okay? So the lipid-soluble, this is a fat-soluble hormone, comes out of the bloodstream, diffuses through the plasma membrane, enters the cell, binds to an enzyme, and causes a strand of messenger RNA to be generated, and then a new protein is made by ribosomes. And this protein, okay, is what causes the effect in the cell. Some of the major human endocrine glands, you can read them over here and where they're at. The pituitary gland is a very important endocrine gland. It has two sections that have very unique functions. The anterior means front, has cells that produce and release hormones, while the posterior part is just a continuation of the hypothalamus. It releases hormones the hypothalamus produces, but it doesn't produce any hormones itself. Only the anterior produce and release hormones. The hypothalamus adjusts hormone production based on current hormone levels. So, if you have too many hormones going around, it will cause, hypothalamus will decrease stimulation of the pituitary gland, and the pituitary gland will decrease the number of hormones. It stops producing hormones. And then when the hormone level gets too low, the hypothalamus will increase stimulation of the pituitary, and the pituitary increases stimulation of this gland, and more hormones are produced. That's called a negative feedback system. Endocrine glands controlled by the posterior pituitary gland. The kidney is and its release of ADH, or antidiuretic hormone. The mammary glands, which produce oxytocin and prolactin, and the uterus, oxytocin. Endocrine glands controlled by the anterior pituitary. Most cells in the body, growth hormone. Mammary glands, prolactin. Thyroid, thyroid stimulating hormone. Adrenal cortex, adrenocorticotropic hormone. Testes, follicle stimulating and luteinizing hormone. Ovaries, FSH and LH. And the brain produces endorphins, and that's controlled by the anterior pituitary. Here are some of the important ones. Antidiuretic hormone. This stimulates cells in the kidney to basically reclaim water and put it back in the bloodstream. So it eliminates the water in the urine. This causes urine to be more concentrated. Oxytocin stimulates ejection of milk from the mammary glands and induces contractions of the uterus during childbirth. Growth hormone promotes the growth and development of all tissues. Endorphins are natural pain relievers that bind to receptors on target cells in the brain. FSH and LH, basically follicle stimulating hormone and this luteinizing hormone, stimulate the hormone release from the testes and the ovaries. Luteinizing hormone also will maintain the uterine lining until if you're pregnant, until your egg has fully implanted and connected with an umbilical. Thyroid stimulating hormone increases hormone production at the thyroid gland, and prolactin stimulates milk production. Sometimes you get too much or too little hormone. Here's two examples. Gigantism, or little people. They used to be called midgets, but that's no longer considered a politically correct term, so we call them little people. They're either exceptionally tall or exceptionally small. In some cases, if you can detect it early enough, you can supply the hormones artificially and avoid both of those syndromes. Metabolism. Your body's metabolism. These are the hormones and that that regulate it and which gland they come from. Thyroid produces thyroid hormone and calcitonin. Parathyroid produces PTH, or parathyroid hormone. Adrenal medulla, epinephrine and norepinephrine. Adrenal cortex, mineralocorticoids, glucocorticoids. Pancreas, insulin and glucagon. And pineal gland, melatonin. What do some of these do? Well, calcitonin decreases blood calcium levels by increasing calcium deposition in bone. So this is the hormone you use to increase your bone mass and density. Parathyroid hormone increases blood calcium levels by harvesting and dissolving bone. Epinephrine and norepinephrine, they stimulate short-term stress responses. Mineralocorticoids, blood volume and salt balance. Glucocorticoids increase glucose levels in the blood and the brain. Insulin reduces blood glucose levels. Glucagon increases blood glucose levels. Melatonin is a hormone that regulates sleep-wake cycles. Let's talk briefly about epinephrine and norepinephrine. It increases heart rate, blood pressure, dilates airways, so breathing rate increases, can increase the metabolic rate, and slow digestion. This one has a lot to do with the fight or flight response. Sometimes if you get scared enough or upset enough, your body will cause you to regurgitate, because when this is occurring, all the blood is pulled out of the digestive system, and the digestive system will evacuate the stomach because it doesn't have the blood to digest it. Hormones regulate metabolism. Here's an example. If your blood glucose is too high, your pancreas will secrete insulin. Insulin will, body cells will take up glucose. And so that blood glucose levels reduce. If your blood glucose gets too low, the pancreas will secrete glucagon, and liver cells will release glucose. Liver stores glucose in a form called glycogen, Glycogen, and that's kind of a storage medium for glucose for quick use to make ATP. Failure to regulate blood sugar levels can lead to diabetes or hypoglycemia. Melatonin, darkness. Being in the dark initiates melatonin synthesis. Light inhibits it. So sleeping in the dark, you will produce more melatonin. Okay, it tells the body cells that there isn't much light and it's time to sleep. In some of the extreme northern and southern latitudes, but like up in Alaska, there are periods of time, if you live far enough north up in Alaska, during certain seasons, the sun never sets. It just kind of circles in the sky. And people have to have these blackout curtains on their windows in order to maintain their sleep cycles. You can buy melatonin and take it as a supplement. However, if you take it as a supplement too often, you can kick your system out of whack and it'll become less and less effective over time. Your reproductive hormones, progesterone regulates your menstrual cycle, it prepares the body for pregnancy. Estrogen regulates the menstrual cycle and maintains secondary sex characteristics in females. Testosterone promotes sperm development and maintains secondary sex characteristics in males. That wraps up this chapter.